So far, I have not been able to find anybody who can make a bobcat edible. Is it possible?
Anything's possible.
Yeah.
You're one of the few that has approached me that said they eat bobcat.
No, I don't eat bobcat. I just haven't found anybody who claims that they can make one that's edible.
You can make anything edible, by different treatments to the meat.
If you wrap it in enough bacon. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. By this point, you're probably stuffed with stuffing and turkey and leftovers. If you had a good hunting season, it's going to be difficult to get everything into the freezer during the rest of the holidays. Time to experiment a little. Take your culinary skills up a notch. Turn game into fine cuisine. Denny Corriveau is America's free-range chef. He tours the nation, teaching folks how to better cook game and wild plants and even locally grown harvest. Denny lives just south of our border, and he gets into Maine a lot. Today, we've got him on the show to talk about free-range cuisine. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Dysarts, EBS, and Napa Auto Parts. Well, sharpen the knives, bring out the seasonings, and let's get started. Denny Corriveau, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you.
Denny Corriveau, free-range chef. What exactly is a free-range chef?
Well, free-range chef, that word free-range is kind of thrown out there, and I do it purposely.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when you deal with all things wild from the outdoors and combine them with, things that are either preservative-free or, anything that's farm and field to table, fits within that category.
Okay. So it's not just necessarily game, but it's also fiddleheads or whatever you find in the woods.
You got it.
Okay.
So forage foods and things that you get locally from the source. So, I believe in clean eating and a clean eating lifestyle. So, obviously my niche is, I'm a master game chef, the only one in the country. But certainly, you want to tie those types of wild foods in with forage foods and things that are close to the source.
You really apparently are the only one in the country, because I've been looking for a while, and I saw your name pop up several times, and then I got in touch with Tenley Bennett up in Aroostook County, and she said that you had been up
Love
there.
Tenley.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Tenley, great people.
Yeah, I've had her on the show a couple of times, too. Wildchef.com is spelled with 2 F's, so anyone looking up Denny Corriveau right now needs to know how to spell it. It's wildchef with 2 F's.com. There are recipes and cookbooks out there, but you seem to have taken it to a whole new level.
Correct. Yeah, I've been doing what I do for well over 25 years, and it really stemmed from a love of the outdoors. Growing up in a large French-Canadian family where we did a lot of cooking and obviously a lot of eating, and I always tell people, you can't trust a skinny cook. So, so you certainly, when you look at me, I'm certainly not obese, but, I've got a little bubble in the middle, and so you can always tell that I'm on the level, So.
Right, yes, okay.
But certainly Wild Chef stemmed out of an idea that I had because I got into hunting when I was about 15 years old. Mm-hmm. And, certainly did plenty of cooking, and I was around that atmosphere, but what I found is, I shot a deer, and I had to figure out what to do with it. And there was really, at the time, there was no knowledge that existed out there. Really, the approach back in those days was, hey, throw some Italian dressing on it, or, throw it in a pan with some butter, or throw some, fat back over it, or, or put it in a crock pot with some cream of mushroom soup, and the world will be good. And, I just didn't care for that style of eating. I mean, I certainly didn't feel that I had to have Taj Mahal cooking, but I also felt that there's got to be a better way to do this. And so what I did is I learned the do's and the don'ts and what you could do with it, and I took it to various levels to, push the limits on what you could do with game. And ultimately what I came up with was I developed the best practice on how to cook game and started to share that knowledge. And it started out very local, where, hey, if you can get a group of people together, I will certainly, teach you what I've learned. And it grew to, from local to state to regional, and eventually to, a national presence where I'm the only guy that teaches, the culinary side of game nationally.
In fact, you established what you call the Free Range Culinary Institute.
Correct. Back in the day, it was called the Wild Chef Cooking Academy because I had to give it a name.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, we've worked with a host of audiences, every major sporting organization in the country, all the people that farm raise game, as well as, people that are health challenge, hunting organizations. I mean, it's just amazing how many people are thirsting for the knowledge.
Yeah, when I go to a fish and game meal of some kind at a sporting club, it tends to be venison chili. It does seem like culinary arts have not necessarily been applied widely across the board throughout the country.
Well, I tell you, speaking of venison chili, I just shipped out a bunch of stuff to make venison chili, and it's just an ongoing, it's very popular. I've got a couple of spice blends that I developed because, and that, bringing it full circle back to wildchef.com, right?
Yep.
Originally, I just wanted to share the knowledge, and that was good enough for me. And what I got is so many requests from people that they wanted to be able to cook and experience the flavors the same way that I would produce them. And I certainly didn't want another thing to do. I was busy enough as it was, but I said, I'll develop a few products, and I'll just use that as a tool for teaching. So I developed about 8 products originally, and started using them and said, hey, listen, if you just have something as simple as some olive oil in any one of these 8 products, I can take you to a place, and I can show you how to develop these types of flavors without the emphasis being on, hey, I've got to go out, and I live in a different part of the country, whether you live out in the boondocks or whether you live, in a city, wherever you lived, I didn't want the emphasis to be on, I have to go out and find these 12 ingredients or whatever goes into a blend. I wanted the focus to be on, hey, I'm learning a technique of how to cook properly, so that I can eventually, experience this cool food experience, and these flavors, the way that, the chef designed it. In essence, it started out with 8, and it's grown to almost 100 products today. It just took a life of its own.
Is that right? Because I saw that you've gone from seasonings to spice to rubs to oils to salts to vinegars. I did not realize you had that many products, though.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, I even have preservative-free, really cool popcorn seasoning. So if somebody wants to make their own kettle corn, and they're at camp or even at home, watching a Patriots game, they would be able to add some of this popcorn seasoning to the kernels that they're popping, and it infuses the flavor in with them. And, really cool flavors, everything from a smoky one to a chili-based one that has a little heat to it. The gals love the cinnamon or the chocolate one. I mean, it's really cool stuff.
My guest is Denny Corriveau, free-range chef. His website is wildchef.com with 2 Fs. Coming up, we'll get some more tips on ingredients and then start talking about how to best cook wild game. I'll even ask if game is supposed to be gamey. This program is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and the radio station is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Denny Corriveau is nationally famous as the Wild Chef, or free-range chef. You'll see him cooking for game nights at sporting clubs in Maine and around the country. He teaches game cooking. He has a line of preservative-free products that are perfect for cooking wild game, but I'm assuming, Denny, that anything you could use on venison, you could also just use in a good cut of steak.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's cross-functional, so whatever you like to eat, including veggies. You could take even your mashed potatoes to a different level just by adding, certain types of herbs in with them to make a flavored mashed potato as opposed to just a plain old mashed potato. I mean, so it kind of accents the flavor. So if you're having a venison steak or you have some grouse and you want to do something cool, you can infuse these other flavors into the other foods that kind of pair up with it on the plate. So it makes food fun. It makes it a lot more interesting.
I generally tend to eat a very unhealthy diet.
A lot of people do.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me if I actually became more of a foodie and concentrated on the good flavors on healthy products, I would probably do better.
Hey, I tell you what, I'll share a couple of concepts with you. One is, if you go out and for the people that are trying to become more health conscious, if you go out and you spend the money on a package of, say, even organic chicken, for example, and, you bring that home and then you throw a seasoning on it that is not preservative-free, then you've kind of wasted your money in spending the extra money to go organic, right? Mm-hmm. Everything in my product line is preservative-free. So, that's one concept there. But The cool thing about this is, like, it still stems back to that original concept. If you can just put some olive oil on a piece of meat, for example, and pick a blend, a theme, you know what I mean? I've themed them. So if you want to go Sicilian, I've got Sicilian. Or you want to go Tuscan, I've got a Tuscan. If you want to go lemon, I've got lemon blends. If you want to go, you know, in another direction, you can go in another direction. So they're kind of themed either ethnically or in a style of cooking that you want to experience. Anybody could do it. My 7-year-old, we filmed a bear recipe for television, and we actually won an award in the outdoor industry for that filming. She had never filmed in her life, but here she is, and she's standing next to me, and we're filming it, and I said, hey, just throw some of this on it. Just throw some of that on it. And I have different blends that I, you know, was using for that particular recipe. Mm-hmm. But, you know, my 7-year-old can do it. So, you know, anybody can do it. I think it's just, I like to put the odds in my favor, and ultimately I tell people, in the end, you will determine whether, you know, I was right or wrong. But I like the odds, you know, going in my favor, so I just choose to use a preservative-free blend to season my food with because it's putting the odds in my favor that I'll be a little more healthy.
Well, we're about 10 minutes into the show, and you've already whacked me upside the head with one concept. It never even occurred to me that I could buy really healthy products and then screw them up by putting unhealthy seasonings on.
Yeah. A lot of people never think of these things. Yeah. It's like going into the grocery store, right? I'm at the grocery store, so I'm going to go down the spice aisle and I'm going to grab whatever's on the shelf that appeals to me at that particular moment, right? Mm-hmm. But there's never any conscious thought to what's in that thing. You know, it could be just ground up powdered junk. Yeah. I mean, you could go into your, and no offense to my good friends that own, you know, that run a lot of these box stores, you know, where people that love the outdoors love to go, mm-hmm. and I go to these stores too. But I certainly wouldn't buy a seasoning there because I know that all the stuff that they're carrying is not preservative-free. So it looks cool and it sounds great from, you know, the packaging standpoint, but ultimately, what are you putting in yourself? You know what I mean? So if that matters to you, for some people it doesn't. You know what I mean? And, you know, God bless you. But for me personally, there's such a difference. It's like the difference between when you've tasted a pure piece of meat, like, you know, some type of venison, versus, you know, a steroid-driven cow. I mean, there's such a flavor distinction between the two, mm-hmm. and it's the same thing with seasonings. If you treat your stuff, you know, with the respect due to it, you know, by you know, using something that's a better quality, and really another factor could be people are looking at it and saying, hey, what's the price point? Literally, I could get $10 a jar for the stuff that I sell, and I don't, because I don't believe in taking people to the cleaners just because I have a natural product. I just want people to use it and have a great food experience, whether they're eating game, whether they're catching a fish and they want to season it up and have it taste great, or whether they're just eating everyday food, you know, just regular home cooking.
Well, it seems to me that not being a price gouger makes you kind of un-American. But
no, believe me, I'm about as, you know, I'll make up for it in other places. Right. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's more for me, you know, just to be able to, you know, see people enjoying their food and eating healthy and trying to help them be healthy. You know, so it's not about making money all the time. It's more about seeing that you're making a difference in people's lives.
That's really the difference.
What we all should be looking at.
Yeah, I mean, some people get into a business because of the love of it, and it seems to be that description fits you.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, you know, I mean, I love to see the reaction on people's face when I cook something, and like I said, it could be something simple. It could be I made a mac and cheese the other night, a homemade mac and cheese. I call it a Tuscan mac and cheese. Mm-hmm. So I basically took some nice ham and put it into a saute pan, and I sauteed it up with some of my Tuscan herbs and some of my air-dried shallots that are part of my product line, and then let that cool down, you know, made some multigrain elbows, and combined those two things up, you know, with some, you know, real healthy heavy cream. and you know, probably about 8 different types of cheeses. You know, a Frenchman can't get away from his cheese. And ultimately, I topped it off with, like, these cool pumpkin croutons that had, like my pie spice, you know, blend type of flavor, and baked that up. And, you know, it was, like, such a difference in it having this kind of cool experience with mac and cheese. And it's the same thing. It doesn't matter what you want to eat. If you just take a different approach to it, you know, you can have new food experiences, and doesn't necessarily mean you got to go out to dinner all the time. I mean, you can make Prince Spaghetti Night a lot more special, or whatever night that you like to enjoy certain types of foods.
Well, I'm Duchesne on one side of the family and LaPlante on the other, so you can see I've got some of the same genes. Yeah. When someone says that game tastes gamey, do you have to resist the temptation to say, duh?
No, because, I think it's just a misnomer most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Very seldom do people actually experience this, extreme gamey flavor. It's really, does pork taste like chicken? Does turkey taste like sausage? Does game taste like seafood? Everything should taste like it's supposed to taste. And if you haven't experienced the taste because you never grew up tasting game, then maybe you think it's gamey. Lamb has that reputation, right? But I cook up lamb, and people go, I would have never known it was lamb. Mm-hmm. It's all in the approach of how you cook something. The only time game can be really gamey is if you don't debone it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so if you debone your meat, not only do you have more flexibility with what you can do with the meat, mm-hmm. In how you package it, how you cut it up, so forth, but, by getting away from the wild animal and its marrow and so forth, that's really what hinges on it. You will occasionally, you are what you eat, right? So if you shoot a sea duck, it lives on the ocean. It's going to have this issue, but it's not something that can't be overcome. I have brines that if people use these certain types of brines and they brine that sea duck, they breast it out and they brine the breast, you can extract that flavor and insert really, really cool flavors into the meat and then grill it or bake it or saute it, whatever you want to do with it, and it transforms it. So, it's all in the approach, the technique. These are all boiling back to what we originally started talking about. It's, learning this best practice approach to how do you deal with your game.
Well, that's good to know because there have been occasions where I have pushed back from the table and said, that wasn't a very good either.
Yeah, for sure. You could go to a game dinner at your gun club and have those kind of bad experiences too. Mm-hmm. It's all, I love my fellow sportsmen, but there are times when people just cook, and it's based on the knowledge that you have. You don't know what you don't know, so you have to have somebody to share that knowledge with you, and then you got to be willing to accept that knowledge and implement it. And I always tell people, hey, listen, it took me all these years to create this knowledge. But what I give you is a starting point for you. Mm-hmm. You can grow that knowledge and add to that knowledge by you now taking that knowledge and doing different things with it. So, if people are open-minded to hear, what I try to teach them, I think they'll certainly go down a path that'll, be successful for them in how they approach their game.
Denny Corriveau is the Wild Chef. His website is wildchef.com with 2 Fs. We're more than 20 minutes into the show, and I'm not yet quite hearing what I usually hear. That game is leaner, you've got to be more careful cooking it or it'll dry out. You've got to disguise some of the flavors with sauces. Denny seems to be saying that you basically make sure to get the fat and bone out, and then you treat it like any other meat. I guess I'll rephrase my question when Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues in a moment on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Saturday mornings at 9, Sunday mornings at 8. Denny Corriveau is the Wild Chef. You slay it, he'll fillet it. If you've been successful during the deer season, Denny can give you venison recipes you've never even thought of. And so, I guess I'm wondering, Denny, when you walk into the kitchen, what are you prepared to do differently if the day's menu is venison instead of beef?
Well, there again, it's all based on cut, and it's all, hey, how do I feel that day? Mm-hmm. Do I feel like, hey, I'm into some southwestern cooking today, so I'm going to take my venison steak, I'm going to trim off the fat off it, I'm going to put it into a Ziploc bag or something, and take a meat pounder and pound it down into a cutlet, and then season it up. After I put some olive oil on it, season it up with some Tex-Mex type of seasoning, and then dredge it, and then up in a flour, free range organic type flour, and then cook it up in a pan and make myself some chicken fried steak that I have with black beans that I melt Mexican cheese over, and then maybe come up with another cool side dish. Is that what I'm in the mood for that day, or do I want to just enjoy it on the grill, where I could take a Wild Chef, say juniper or a maple balsamic, and then add a little bit of olive oil to it, whisk it up, throw it in a bag for a couple of hours, and then grill it off. And the minute it obviously hits the grill, you get that little waft of smoke that comes up on a hot grill, and you're like, oh my God, man. And then when you obviously flip it over, and you get that nice little edge on the outside of it, but leave it pink in the middle, let it rest for a couple of minutes. Make some mashed potatoes. You're going in and maybe you're sautéing up some peppers and onions to go over it, and you're having this cool experience. You know what I mean? So it's like something as simple as even like a flavored balsamic, or doing something like, which by the way, I was mentioning that Tex-Mex approach to having like a chicken fried venison steak.
Yep.
Most people will run it through their machine to make it like a cube steak. You don't have to. You can pound it out and do the approach that I said. And here's another concept on cooking game. If you take and you put some type of olive oil, now a lot of times I use flavored olive oil, so in that case of a Tex-Mex, I might use my lime olive oil and then put my Tex-Mex seasoning on it. Mm-hmm. But anytime that you put some type of fat content, like an olive oil, onto like a venison steak, or could be a breast of partridge, or whatever the case may be, and then you season it up, and then you dredge it and saute it, this is what happens. It traps the flavor in with the meat. The essential oils get released onto the meat, and it keeps it moist because, most people, when they dredge it dry.
True.
By putting the olive oil, up against the meat, it helps hold a moisture content, which moisture is everything that's needed when it comes to game, right? Because it's so lean. And then by seasoning it up and trapping that seasoning in with the dredging, now you've got those essential oils getting released as it's cooking, flavoring the meat. And then when you pull it out, let it rest for a couple minutes, I'm telling you, it's a whole different experience that you'll have with your game. And see, there's just one concept of many that I try to teach, across the country.
I mean, that's one hell of a tip you just gave us here. Do you have tips like this on wildchef.com?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I have other people build my website for me, so I say, hey, what do you need? But certainly I give seminars, and I am moving towards trying to create that type of stuff for wildchef.com, where people would be able to just click on and watch a how-to video or something to that effect, where they can gain some more knowledge. Not everybody's able to make the locations where I do. I try to do some stuff around New England to. In particular, because this is my home base. This is where I grew up. This is where I'm from, and I'm a die-hard New Englander. But certainly, there are plans that we will implement, those types of things on the website if they're not already there. And even by reading the recipes, and I've had people that didn't like venison. I had a guy approach me, and he went to one of my seminars here on the seacoast of New Hampshire. And he said, hey, listen, my wife would never eat venison, and I bought your, venison cookbook. And he said, I've been following the recipes and going right through the recipes and making a lot of these recipes, because he ordered a bunch of product too. And he said, she loves venison now. Everything that you describe and how to make those recipes, they come out exactly as you described them. I said, well, I would hope so. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to use my stuff, but, don't expect to get the same result of the recipe if you don't.
Yeah.
And and really, like I say, the product side is like a sidebar for me, but it is a great tool, and you will have this cool experience. But certainly, the recipes in and of themselves, you'll experience those types of how-tos, when you make the stuff and utilize the Wild Chef products. So,
how often is it your goal to disguise the flavor of something?
Never.
Never. Okay. So, for instance,
why would you want to disguise? I always tell people, listen, I believe in the Goldilocks theory of cooking. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? What's important to you? I mean, are you a person that it's like my wife, for example? She's got like this. I've never found anybody in my life that has a sensitive palate like her. I could put a pinch of something to season anything, and she'll be like, it has a little nip to it. And I'm like, now nip, my God, I just put a pinch. Come on now, right? And then, but you also have the purist that is like, hey, all I want is salt and pepper on it. And that's, hey, if that's what you like, go for it. You know what I mean?
So far, I have not been able to find anybody who can make a bobcat edible. Is it possible?
anything's possible.
Yeah.
You're one of the few that has approached me that said they eat bobcat.
No,
So,
I don't eat bobcat. I just haven't found anybody who claims that they can make one that's edible.
You can make anything edible, by different treatments to the meat.
If you wrap it in enough bacon.
Yeah, it's like the old guy said, hey, wrap it in bacon, throw it in the oven, add some wine to it, and then, and a brick, and then, throw everything else out and eat the brick, right? It really, if you're into that, hey, more power to you. I mean, I know I have some good Penobscot Indian friends from Maine that, they eat a lot of things that a lot of other people won't because it's part of their cultural heritage, and more power to them. But guess what they're doing now? They're using the Wild Chef blends to, season their stuff up. You know what I mean? Not to say it didn't taste good before, but they're saying, hey, man, they're rocking it out with, whatever they want to eat. So the Goldilocks is really, everybody has a different taste level that, of what means something to them. So, some people don't want a lot of seasoning, some want intermediate, and some people just totally crave flavor and they kill it. But, my theory has always been find somewhere in between where, you can accent and use natural herbs to flavor your game, but, you never want to drown your game with something that all you're going to do is taste whatever you seasoned it with, because at that point you might as well just grab the jar and a spoon and start munching. You know what I mean? Because, what's the point? You know what I mean? The whole reason we go out and get game is because we know how special it is.
Yeah. The voice you are hearing belongs to Denny Corriveau, the Wild Chef. Here's a guy who experiments in the kitchen all the time. So I suppose my next question is obvious. How often does an experiment go horribly wrong? That's coming up on Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine here on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Good morning, I'm Bob Duchesne, host of Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and this is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Even if it doesn't sound like it, we're talking cooking this morning. Cooking wild game with Denny Corriveau, the Wild Chef. So you know what question is coming, Denny. With all the experimentation you do in the kitchen, how often do you have experiments that go horribly wrong?
Well, I have to be careful on how I answer such questions, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't want to come across as arrogant. You know what I mean? But I can honestly say that, and I don't take any credit for it, by the way. It's kind of a God-given thing. I've been pretty blessed with the ability to be able to just think things up in my mind and cook them up, and however I envision them to be is how they come out. Not everybody can do that, but certainly I've been pretty blessed in that regard. So my experiments over the years have really been in, let me redefine game. Let me take it to a place it's never been. Let me take some ground venison burger, for example, or ground wild turkey, and let me infuse that with some herbs and some olive oil, saute it up in a pan, not fully cooked, only cook it about a third of the way through. Take a naan bread or something to that effect, because you don't have to worry about rolling out a pizza dough or something, right?
Right. Yeah.
And anybody can buy these naan breads for $3 or something at the grocery store, and then brush some olive oil on it. Throw those chunks of sausage you just cooked up in the pan about a third of the way, right? And then throw other ingredients on it. So if you took a Tuscan blend, for example, you could throw some ricotta cheese that you threw into a bowl and added some cracked pepper or parsley or whatever you want to put in it. And then throw some chunks of that on with the sausage. Then maybe throw some roasted red peppers on top of it. Throw some Italian cheeses, and then either throw it on a grill on a low to low medium heat, or in the oven at 400 until the cheese melts, and then just get out your pizza cutter and cut it up and enjoy it. At camp, enjoy it while you're eating, watching the Patriots game for a tailgate type thing or what have you. I mean, we made, I'm not sure if you're aware, I work with some of the New England Patriots. A lot of people that know me here in New England know that Matt Light, who used to protect Tom Brady, is a personal friend of mine, and so I cook for his annual fundraiser for his foundation. And usually I feed about 500 people, and I create this really crazy fish and game type of menu with free range stuff mixed in with it. And this past year, I decided to do something that's never been done in this country. And I said, I'm going to redefine game once again. And I created various types of wild game sushi and did a whole tasting area with wild game sushis. So I did like a gator gumbo. I did a duck one that had 3 different types of duck in it.
Really?
I did a wild turducken, which had wild turkey, quail, and duck l'orange. And then I did an elk one that the elk loin was grilled, and then I sliced it nice and medium rare with a nice special type of horseradish sauce over the sushi rice. And, we made a little special one there. And people just went nuts, and it's just really, it's up to your own imagination. So, when you say make mistakes, do this, do that, it's really like, it's up to you. How far do you want to take it? Where do you want to go with it? But where it all starts with, taking an ethnic theme or a style, whether it be barbecue or Southwestern or what have you, whether it be French, German, Italian, whatever, and going in that direction. And then once you go in that direction, okay, well, what can I do with this? Can I make a venison lasagna? Can I take my wild turkey and make a wild turkey burger, or do something cool with my wild turkey? So it's really up to the individual. How innovative do you want to be, or are you just straightforward? Hey, I just love the flavor of it. I just want to cook it just like I normally would. I mean, it's really, what's important to you.
Can somebody who wants to cook venison a little bit differently walk into a grocery store and buy something that was meant to be used as a sauce for beef or something and use that, or is that just not going to work?
You could. Mm-hmm. You could absolutely. I mean, there are different products that exist out there. You just got to keep your eyes open when you're walking through a store. And it doesn't have to be a grocery store. It could be, a specialty food store or something like that that's kind of cool. Like, maybe you're walking into the old port in Portland, Maine, and, you've got like a little specialty grocery store or something down in that area, and you walk in and you see these things that you've never seen before. And you're like, hey, man, I could probably, try to play around with that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like vegetables or fruits that you haven't seen and doing something cool. It's like grabbing, say you've caught some nice striper or something and you want to, enjoy it in the summertime, and you're like, how can I, what am I going to pair up with this? I mean, pick up a celery root and cook it up with, chunk it up after you peel it and, cook it with a potato and then mash it and add some butter and whatnot, and maybe a tiny bit of cream to it, and make it into like a puree, and then you put your striper that you cook up, resting up against that celery root puree, or maybe you see papaya or mango or something, and you cut those types of things up. Now, if you add like a Wild Chef lime olive oil rather, maybe some fresh cilantro, could be some vanilla sea salt. Maybe some of my jalapeno flakes, you make this kind of cool fruit salsa that, goes along with the striper, so it's endless, there's so much stuff out there, and that's what I did, 30 years ago, as I started saying, hey, what's out there, can I utilize it?
The funny thing is, I just had breakfast and now I'm hungry again.
I tend to have that effect on people.
Well, let me ask you this, since I don't really cook game much, I really don't know what the differences are in handling various meats. So let's say moose versus venison, or how is that different than cooking bear? So just walk me through a little bit about how you treat each particular cut of meat because of the species it is.
Well, it's all relevant, right? So first you're looking at what cut of meat you have. You certainly want to trim out the fat because fat, you were talking about that gamey flavor. Well, if you leave fat on a piece of wild game, that can affect, because the fat is much different than, say, a farm-raised piece of game. So, you pretty much have to eliminate the fat. Mm-hmm. You can incorporate fat into it because obviously you need something to keep it moist. But certainly, you're going to experience a little bit difference in the flavor between a bear, a moose, or a deer. But you can approach it with similar concepts. Well, a bear tends to, have some nice steaks on it, but you don't want to, in any of those three, you don't want to overcook them.
That seems to be the number one mistake people make, is overcooking them. Yeah.
Unless you plan on, trying out for the Boston Bruins or something, and you need a hockey puck. That's about all it's going to be worth at that point. And I truly understand that, different strokes for different folks. There are people that do like, their steak a little more well done than others. Some people, they want it, where it's still grunting, from the woods, and then there's people in between. I mean, find a happy medium, but try to leave some pink in there because it really accents the flavor. You'll get a lot more out of it.
Yeah.
It'll be a lot more moist and tender. And, like I say, the difference between a bear steak, a deer steak, and a moose steak is probably the size. Some people are, matter of fact, I was thinking of throwing a moose steak on the grill tonight. You're getting me salivating for it now.
I do that to people sometimes.
Yeah, so, we're French, you know what I'm saying? We love to eat.
Yeah. Well, bear is
kind of like the Italians.
Yeah, bear is kind of greasy, so how do you deal with that?
That's a misnomer, too.
Is it really?
It's, remove the fat. You know,
Okay.
It's like my brother-in-law who grew up in Maine, and, he's one of the two guys that got me into hunting originally. And he was claiming for the longest time, I don't eat duck because it's greasy. And I kept looking at him, what are you talking about? It's greasy. I said, if you're cooking a whole duck, there's a possibility there, but there's ways to approach that. So I said, like anything else, if you want to learn how to cook a game bird, whether it's waterfowl or whether it's upland, focus on the breast meat to start with. So breast out the bird. You can always use the other stuff to make a stock or a soup or something to that effect. But certainly, use the breast. And if it's a wild bird, take the fat off it.
Yeah, whenever I've dealt with duck in the past, it seems like if I'm just roasting it, I've got a puddle of grease underneath the pan that's you can float a battleship in.
Yeah. I mean, take the fat off it.
Yeah, okay.
Now you got this breast sitting in front of you, and what am I going to do with it?
What is Denny Corriveau going to do with it? Denny is the wild chef, a specialist in free-range cuisine. Whatever he would do with it, it's better than whatever I was going to do, which wouldn't be pretty. What would Denny do? Up next as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. You're listening to Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, and today we're cooking wild game. Denny Corriveau is the wild chef. You've probably seen his name attached to various game dinners around the state over the last few years. He's specialized in free-range cuisine for over a quarter century. And we left off with the question, what would Denny do with a wild duck breast that's sitting right there on the kitchen counter in front of you?
There's a million different things you can do with it. You could make a breakfast hash where you could cut it up into, like, cubes and take some potatoes, like a red potato, some sweet potato, and I even did a matter of fact, speaking of duck, I'm now one of the magazines here in New England called Foodies of New England is all about people who are big foodie fans that love to go out and have great different types of food. And so they want to feature me as a regular on showing everyday people how to, approach game, whether they're finding buffalo, duck, or anything at the store. And so we just did a photo shoot here recently, and they wanted me to cook duck. So I said, fine. So I took the duck, and I cubed it up and did as I described, you're just cooking some onions up that you've diced. You diced up, very small, some sweet potato, red potatoes. I even took some celery root. Seasoned that up in a pan, and I cooked it in olive oil and butter, and when I got to where it was starting to get tender on the veggies, I had pre-seasoned up with some olive oil, some of that diced up duck meat, and threw that in and made a duck hash. And then I made a duck marsala, a cherry and duck marsala, that I draped over that hash, and it was a pretty cool dish. So, I believe it's going to be in the spring issue because they just came out with their winter issue, but people might want to keep an eye out for that one because that's, just another idea how you could use duck. So, just remove the fat. You can pound it out into a cutlet. You could cut that breast in half and then pound it into smaller cutlets. You can grind that breast meat up and make an awesome burger. You can even turn it into a turducken burger if you wanted to add wild turkey with the duck. and maybe throw a little bit of andouille or something in there, you can make a really cool, turducken burger.
It seems to me that having a 7-year-old daughter is a good excuse to have her pound out the cutlet. Isn't that what
she would jump in and do anything.
Yeah.
She's been on my hip cooking since she was 3 months old, and she just, as soon as Dad is in the kitchen, she's usually not far behind. And even Sunday morning, if I want to make crepes, she's right there. She wants to pour the crepe batter onto the crepe pan, and of course she wants to eat the first one out of the pan too. But
naturally,
there's nothing wrong with that. That's what life's all about. It's really getting your kids involved and letting them understand where their food comes from, and letting them be part of that experience.
Well, you teach game cooking all over the country, so do you have to get familiar with Western species as well, or is it pretty much the same no matter what you're cooking?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, again, it's, you are what you eat, right? So depending on where you are, the animals are feeding on different things, and you just have to have that familiarity, because there are some areas out west where, some of these animals are feeding on sagebrush, where that sage, flavor kind of permeates through some of the meat. But for the most part, there are, very parallel approaches to how you approach it.
I'm thinking javelina. Do they cook that out there? Because I have no idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Javelina, wild boar. Mm-hmm. It's all good. Certainly, at wild boar, I love wild boar.
Yeah. What's the tastiest Western animal that we don't have here?
Wild boar would probably be one of them.
Yeah, I would think so.
For sure. Elk, elk is awesome. Mm-hmm. Antelope is great. It's like high-speed veal,
Okay. Well, Denny Corriveau, it's wildchef.com. Why 2 Fs in chef?
It's just, I guess I just like to be unique.
It worked. I mean, I like it. I can't get it out of my head now, and I've mentioned it like 3 times in the show. That's the website address. It's Wild Chef with 2 Fs.
Yeah, there are others that have tried to follow, what I mean, and they go with the 1 F, but truly, I'm the only guy that started with Wild Chef some 30 years ago, so, they could follow suit all they want, but you'll find that a lot of people do bits and pieces. They don't really do the full enchilada.
Well, when I was thinking about who can I get on this show to talk about cooking wild game, as I say, your name kept popping up because you do seem to get into Maine quite a bit. You actually live in what, New Hampshire?
I actually live where Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts all come together.
Oh.
And but I have a love for Maine. I did live in Maine. I grew up in New Hampshire. Actually graduated high school in North Conway, so up in the White Mountains. Mm-hmm. And used to live around the Sebago Lake area. And I actually have some land I purchased up in Maine recreationally, up in central Maine. And certainly I've had those trips up to Aroostook County, where Tenley Bennett has her lodge, Fish River Lodge, and had some great experiences there, hunting and fishing. Yeah,
well, when Denny Corriveau is cooking at one of these wild game suppers, it's going to be a different experience than what you would normally have at a wild game supper. Because, as I say, much of it is just chili. When I look at your website and see some of the recipes you prepared, it looks like a French kitchen.
It's crazy. I'll tell you, Bob, it's really... half of what I do isn't even on that website. I mean, every menu that I do is unique and different, and I try to take that approach. I mean, I have had some cool things. What I thrive on is having these unique, cool experiences, right?
Yeah.
I've been invited in to cook at places here in New England where they've been old houses that date back to the 1700s, and they have old paintings of the old historic figures that, we all know who they are. Mm-hmm. And you go into a place like that and you create this, kind of modern-themed colonial game dinner to try to give people an experience that's really unique and different, and it kind of, just takes them to the modern times, but you're still serving game and you're trying to do these cool things, whether it's like a French tortilla, which is like a pork pie, but you're using wild game in it instead, or any other number of things where you're taking these indigenous foods that come from New England and trying to incorporate them into a game dinner. And it's just amazing because you go and do something like that, and you walk into places like that, and knowing that people like George Washington visited these buildings, or Sam Adams, or some of the founding guys of this country. It's moving. I mean, you go in there and you emotionally go, "Wow, man, this is amazing," because it's like George Washington probably sat here and ate a venison steak. It's just awesome. So it's cool. It's cool. There's a lot of things you can do.
The website is wildchef.com. He's Denny Corriveau, and again, I'm sure you'll be coming to Maine and cooking for folks. So if somebody sees your name on a poster somewhere, they really should go.
Yeah. I love meeting people up there and love the people of Maine.
Denny Corriveau, the Wild Chef. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, which now airs twice every weekend, Saturday morning at 9 a.m. and Sunday morning at 8 a.m. And it's archived with all the previous shows on the website at 929theticket.com. This show is all about fun and adventure in the outdoors. If you ever have a topic or event that you think would be good for the show, drop me an email from the website at 929theticket.com. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Dysarts, EBS, and Napa Auto Parts. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket.